Welcome to the 12th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford, and today I have a special treat. I have the first Streetcast. I was in New York City in July for Thriller Fest, and I had the opportunity to interview Jason Starr, the author of many dark crime and noir suspense novels. His novels include The Follower, Panic Attack, Fake ID, and many others. And his brand new novel, which I just mentioned, Panic Attack, is in hardback now. And as I mentioned, this is our first Streetcast. Since I was in New York, and New York is such a central part of many of Jason's novels, I decided to interview him while walking the streets of New York. And if you're familiar with New York City, we were walking up 42nd Street and ended up at the New York Public Library, where we sat down and ended the interview. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my interview with Jason Starr. And again, his new novel, Panic Attack, is in stores now. Thanks.
This is Lee Child, and I'm listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast.
So I'm here in New York City, and this is the first Reading and Writing Podcast Streetcast. I'm here with Jason Starr, the author of many crime and mystery novels, and we're actually going to do this interview on the streets of New York. And so this should be an interesting experience. So Jason, thanks for joining us.
No problem. Anytime.
Yeah. So you have a new book coming out, Panic Attack. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Panic Attack is another thriller, standalone. Takes place mainly in New York. It's about a break-in. It starts off with a break-in at a house in Forest Hills, owned by a psychologist, Adam Bloom, and he lives there with his wife and daughter, a recent college grad. And Bloom, in defending his family, he winds up shooting one of the intruders, and the other one gets away, and wants revenge for his close friend who was killed. And then it's a thriller where I get into everyone's point of view, and there's a lot of satire in it. So it was a lot of fun to write. Cool.
And this is a standalone, and it's following your most recent novel, which was The Follower, which was set in New York City and concerned a stalker. So if you haven't read The Follower, you should check that out. I'm curious, what do you think? I just want to make sure this is recording. Yeah, it is. What do you think the appeal of crime and noir fiction is for readers?
I think readers like what I consider to be like a realistic view of the world. Noir fiction is very honest, and crime fiction in general is there's a lot of it's very unpredictable as opposed to I guess what you would call mystery fiction or mainstream detective fiction where there's a safety zone where you know the main character is going to be safe. I think noir and crime stories are more unpredictable because no one's safe. And it's interesting to me though how these types of stories on TV are extremely popular. The ability to be edgy in your work is something that's much more mainstream, I think, on television, in comics. In mystery fiction, it's I think it's a little harder to be that provocative.
Great. And speaking of comics, don't you have a comic series that's either out now or going to be published?
I have a graphic novel that's coming out in January from DC Comics called The Chill. It's Vertigo Crime. It's a new crime line they're starting, and the first one is Ian Rankin is writing the first one, and then Brian Azzarello is doing the second, and then mine comes out. And the art is by a Italian artist, Mick Bertolorenzi, very talented artist, and this was a lot of fun to write. Again, like I was saying before, it's I feel like in comics I could just take so many more risks in my writing that I think it's just getting harder and harder to do in mainstream mystery fiction. You could take more risks with language, violence.
Right.
Like a lot of stuff that I think has become mainstream particularly on cable television, and the most popular, most talked about shows are very edgy.
Sure. Sopranos,
Dexter.
Sure.
Even to some extent, something like Sex and the City.
Right.
Very provocative. I don't think you could do stuff like that in mainstream, crime fiction. I don't think that works the way it would 15, 20 years ago.
And do you think that's something in terms of, for the lack of a better word, taboos among publishers or readers?
I think it's a combination. I think it's it's kind of how the economics, I think, of the book business has evolved. The way books are distributed, the books that get pushed by the chains and Walmart, Costco type places.
Right.
They're not going to be the edgiest.
Right.
It's not going to be the edgiest side of the genre. I think a lot of the books that are currently winning awards and a lot of critically acclaimed books of mystery fiction are finding a hard time getting a real mass audience.
Right.
And I think I think publishers have to figure out a way. I think publishers have to figure out a way of making these books these stories more marketable. Like I said, I think there is an audience for them because you just see the audience in other media.
Right. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. Because you're right. In terms of the Sopranos.
A publisher could say like, "Oh no, this is so dark and edgy. It's never going to sell. People don't want that." I disagree. I think that's actually what people want. I think people want to be challenged, and I don't think they know that a lot of this stuff exists.
Interesting. Yeah.
They don't see it.
So when you were first starting your path to publication, so to speak, I've read in other interviews that you were pretty relentless in terms of submitting your work to agents. I wonder if you could just talk about that and kind of your what your experience was in getting published initially with your first novel.
Well, I was a telemarketer before I got published. Worked at a lot of. Actually, right now we're walking by the New York Public Library where I did a lot of my writing before I got published. Wrote a few unpublished manuscripts at this library.
Sitting at the library?
Sitting at the library. Well, I would work part-time. So telemarketing was a perfect job, but I also worked in...
you just want to sit down and we can just...
Yeah. I worked in magazines, publishing. Ironically, worked for St. Martin's Press, my current publisher. The only job I was ever fired from, actually. I was fired for reading and writing on the job.
On the job?
On the job.
So is that on your book jacket?
It was fired. Well, hopefully it wasn't foreboding. But telemarketing was really the perfect training ground, I think, for a writer because you're rejected so much. And that's something you have to deal with as a writer at every level. Whether you're just starting out, sending out manuscripts, or you're a published author, pitching ideas, and you're constantly rejected. You're constantly getting bad reviews or good reviews, but you have to deal with the ups and the downs. And I think for me, telemarketing was a good preparation for that. And when I was sending out my first book, Cold Caller.
which I've read, highly recommended.
Thank you. I got a lot of rejections. I have a big stack of rejections. I know Stephen King talks about all the big stack that he has,
Right.
but I'm sure mine rivals that.
Wow.
And
So do you still have it?
I do. I do have all the rejections, and I hold grudges. So if anybody rejected it. So then just on a chance, I sent the manuscript to a UK publisher, Exit Press, and I got there in a very roundabout way. A reader for another publishing house championed it at No Exit. And they bought it, and they bought world rights, and then they wound up selling my books back to the United States and a number of other foreign countries. Some of those are still my publisher right now. And
what was your first novel published in the U.S.?
It was published a year later. So
Okay,
this was 97.
okay.
I did the UK deal. 98. It came out here. And then I got an agent and started doing things more normally.
Right.
For my third book. But it was really a matter of being relentless as far as getting published, because it was very easy to get discouraged. One reason I really didn't get discouraged is I felt my manuscript wasn't read.
Right.
When
It just didn't make it through the wall.
yeah,
basically.
I mean, you could tell when you get a lot of form letters back,
sure.
and no one's really reading your book.
It's a hurdle. I used to work at a literary agency, so I know from the other side.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, but if you start, if I started seeing a lot of rejections and they were specific, and I probably would have gone on to another book, or
Sure.
done something different. But I knew the book really wasn't getting read.
Right.
So, and it was just like a stubbornness on my part. Like, I remember every day I said, okay, I'm going to send out 5 letters a day. Like every single day, no matter what, I'm going. This was, the internet was just starting out.
Sure.
Mid to late 90s, so I was sending out by snail mail 5 to 10 letters a day, and
Okay.
5 to 10 letters a day, and eventually I started to get some nibbles, and I think good work will ultimately be discovered. I don't think there's a lot of
Undiscovered
gems
Yeah.
out there. But then again, it's really, I think it's a combination of talent, luck, and perseverance. And if you have a lot of luck and perseverance, that can even overwhelm talent.
Right.
Those are probably even more important.
Sure. You mentioned you were working on some novels here, that you're writing novels at the public library.
Yep.
Were you doing that on a laptop, handwriting?
I was writing by hand then, yeah. I was a big, Hemingway was one of my early influences, and I read that he used to write by hand, so I was
What's the writing process like for you? Do you sit down with an idea? Do you outline beforehand? Do you just kind of see where the story idea takes you? What's your...
I have what I like to think of as an evolving outline. I do outline everything. I don't, for me, plot always comes first, even before character. I think of it almost as the way you would pitch a movie. That's why I kind of think of the story in my head. Clear action with the entire book. And then I'll sit down, I'll plot it out, major plot points. It's kind of just like a very loosely written paragraph, and then I'll kind of go longer with it. Sometimes it'll go up to like 5-10 pages. And then I'll start writing. Very early on, I'll just start writing that first sentence, the first paragraph, get a sense of what the first chapter is. I already have an idea of what the end is in my head.
Before you start writing.
Yeah, before I start. And then, as I'm going each day, I'll always outline as I go along. So I'll have new ideas. Sometimes the entire book will change.
Right.
But I always want to have a sense of what the ending is. Because I'm afraid I'll get stuck in the middle. Otherwise. And I like to know, I kind of think of it as a maze where there's a beginning and there's an end. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to get there.
Sure.
And in my head, it makes me feel like I'm eventually going to get it done. Like, here's the ending, here's the beginning. I'm just filling it in the middle.
Right.
Right. And it kind of simplifies the whole thing in my head. Because I think when I first started writing, and I was writing short stories, plays, the idea of doing a novel seemed kind of overwhelming. How am I going to write this long book? And key for me, I think, was simplifying it, making it into something that I knew I could complete.
Sure. And you mentioned plays and short stories when you started. What was it that initially got you interested in writing? Was it just something that you've always been interested in? Was there a specific moment or event that got you interested?
Well, I started writing in college, and I was writing short stories at the time. I wasn't really exposed to any crime fiction.
And where were you going to college?
Well, the books that were Binghamton.
Okay, right, yep.
The books that were assigned to me in high school were all the literary classics, and then in college I got very into it was the mid to late '80s, so I got into Raymond Carver.
Sure.
It was very popular then, and a big influence because of his very simple style. It's very appealing.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know that much about. I mean, the only real crime fiction I'd read previously was. You can't even call Agatha Christie. It's not like a crime fiction. It's more like mystery fiction.
Sure.
I read a lot of Mickey Spillane when I was in high school, but I wasn't really widely exposed to crime fiction. And I remember a friend who suggested I read Jim Thompson after college. Really loved his stuff. So that led me to people like Kane and this.
Sure.
Other classics. But then I started reading a lot of more modern writers at the time, like Homer Leonard.
Right.
George V. Higgins. And it kind of took a while, though, to realize that I knew I enjoyed reading all this stuff.
Sure.
But I was still kind of writing in this kind of pseudo-literary way.
Right.
Because I kind of felt, after being in college creative writing classes, I kind of felt like that's the way you're supposed to write. But then I guess I kind of had a moment where I realized I should really be writing kind of stuff that I like to read.
Right.
And at the time I was reading more, a lot of literary stuff, Dostoevsky and Camus, stuff like that. And, so I knew I wanted to write crime fiction. It was also psychological, satirical.
So you've written a couple of books in collaboration with Ken, how do you pronounce his last name?
Bruin. Yep.
And I wonder what that collaboration process is like for you. Do you trade chapters or write chunks of the book and then trade off, or what's the story?
Well, we've written 3 books so far together, all with hard case crime, Bust, Slide, and The Max. And Bust was the first one. We both wanted to do books for hard case because we loved what they were doing. This combination of printing, reprinting old pulp fiction,
right.
like David Goodis and
Charles Williams.
Charles Williams, great book, A Touch of Death. But we were writing at the time. I was still with Vintage, and he was with St. Martin's Cat, and it kind of seemed like if we did a book for hard case independently, it would kind of compete with our other books. So we came up with the kind of nutty idea that we would co-write a book, and Charles Ardai, who's the publisher of Hard Case, went along with it. We gave him a chapter, and he gave us a contract.
That's always nice.
Yeah, but the way we did it is, it was loosely based on a book I had written but hadn't published.
Right.
There were some problems with it. That we could never really fix. And I kind of had the idea, like, well, what if we make this other character Irish? And Ken thought it was a great idea. But we still had to get the voice down to how we were going to do this, because it was basically rewriting that entire book. We loosely kept the plot, but the main characters, like Max and Angela, but we changed a lot. So he took a crack at writing a first chapter, and then I wrote part of it. And I said, Ken, if we continue doing it like this, it's going to seem like 2 different people wrote it, because our styles are totally different. So I said, well, we could do something like this, and I wrote it, and I kind of did my take on what he had written. And then he kind of did his take on what I had written, and by going back and forth a few times on it, like I kind of lent my style toward his, and he lent it toward mine.
Right.
And we got to the point where we could just both write sections, and it almost seemed like...
In that kind of
it almost seemed
complementary style.
Yeah, it almost seemed like one person was writing. I mean, I would always go over and
Sure.
smooth it over. Ken's more of like a one draft
Right.
type guy, as I'll freely admit.
Yeah. And so,
so-
are you working on any other projects with him right now?
We're talking about doing a fourth book. I don't know
Sure.
when we're going to get to it, though. But
Any other
I have the plot
collaborations?
in my head. I have the whole
Oh,
plot.
okay. Any other collaborations?
You know, I've never. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine collaborating with anybody else. I mean, I think it was a unique experience. I think you see most writing teams are usually like a mother-daughter.
Sure.
Like sister brothers, two
Right.
sisters.
Two
like
sisters.
parishes.
Yeah, exactly.
But co-writing usually, it's hard to blend that voice, and I think it could be, a lot of people think they could do it, and then there are conflicts.
Right.
We really didn't have very many conflicts. I think we both had the same vision for the books. When you read them, you'll see that it's not really like the books we write independently. They're very,
Sure.
There's a lot of dark comedy, tongue-in-cheek type stuff. So we had a lot of fun doing it, and I think that was the key. Like it was really enjoyable. It was a good break
Right.
from what we were doing, and I don't know if I could find that type of connection.
Right. So, given where you're at in terms of your publishing and your writing career, what kind of advice would you have for aspiring writers and people who would like to be published?
Well, I would continue to, I would write what you want to write. Write what you want to read.
Yeah.
We'll redo that.
Yeah.
My advice would be to write the types of books you like to read, and to be relentless. To when you have a manuscript, show it to people you trust. If you start hearing similar criticism from multiple people, take it seriously. If one person has a criticism, don't take it seriously. Just
Discount it.
Yeah, just totally ignore it. Because it's meaningless.
Sure.
Even when you get published, you can have one. Look at any bestsellers books or any acclaimed literary writer. Look at their reviews on Amazon. 20% of them are going to be horrible.
Right.
Reviews.
Right.
You're never going to please everybody.
Sure.
But you want to make sure you're pleasing about 75% of people.
So that's the key.
Yeah. So if you hear it from everybody,
Yeah.
The book has a problem.
Sure.
And stick with it. I mean, I think anybody who really has a passion to do this is going to is going to be successful.
Right.
Talent's important, but I think passion is even more important.
Sure. There's been a lot of news coverage about the popularity or supposed popularity of Amazon's Kindle and the rise in ebooks and where book publishing is headed. I wonder if you ever give much thought to that and where you think book publishing is headed in terms of ebooks, digital media, etc.
Well, I think about that all the time, and a lot of writers seem concerned about it. Even here at Thriller Fest, it's a big topic around the bar. I think, I personally think that the industry is moving rapidly toward the ebook. We see Borders in significant trouble right now. Walden Books just closed. And the Kindle is becoming more and more popular.
Sure.
And I just saw recent projections where Kindle sales are going to go up exponentially and Kindle downloads over the next few years. And I ultimately see a publishing landscape where you're going to have Kindle, other ebooks. I'm sure Barnes & Noble is going to come up with some rival to it.
Yeah.
And independence. And I think the independents will have a resurgence to some extent, because I think the book market is going to become more specialized.
Sure.
And people are going to want to buy books as gifts, and it's going to become more of a special item. But I think the majority of reading is going to be done over Kindle. I think the majority of reading is going to be done with Kindle. I think young people adapt to it. My daughter It loves reading on it. It just comes very natural to her. Because
Right.
you could switch off from her Nintendo to the Kindle. And it's just very natural to hold an electronic device. And I think to some extent it's going to, as an author, I think it's going to empower us to some degree, because I think the issue of distribution is not going to be as vital, and it's not as out of control. For example, now people who are listening to this podcast might run out to their local chain in Middle America and look for the new book by Jason Starr or the new book by Ken Bruin, and they might not see it there. If a majority of the book buying is done by Kindle, everyone will be able to just, who's interested in our books now, will be able to just go download them instantly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So publicity like this would have a lot more value to a author who doesn't have the distribution of a current top 10 bestseller.
Right. Great. Well, that's all the questions that I had. I mentioned earlier you have Panic Attack coming out. Is that in August?
Yep, Panic Attack is on sale August 4th, I'm sorry.
August 4th.
Yep, St. Martin's, it's a hardcover. My graphic novel, The Chill, is out in January. Fake ID is out right now from
Hard Case
Crime.
Anything else in the works?
I'm actually working on a couple of different projects. I'm not sure which one's going to be the next one. I'm working on another thriller. I'm working on something else that's completely different. And we'll take it from there. I have a couple of TV projects. One of my books is in development as a TV show. I'm excited about that.
Wow, that's great.
So,
which book?
The Follower.
Oh, great.
So check in at for updates on that on my website.
Yeah, sure. And your website is?
www.jasonstar.com.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my latest interview. If you would like to leave me some feedback or have a comment on the show, I would love to get your voicemail. You can leave me a voicemail at 206-888-2731. Again, that's 206-888-2731. Also, if you enjoyed listening to this interview, you can subscribe to the feed for the podcast in iTunes. And if you really enjoyed it, I would love for you to leave me a comment in iTunes so that other people can discover the podcast in the iTunes store. It's very simple. You go to the iTunes store and leave a review. Thanks again, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another interview with a writer that you enjoy reading.
This is Kevin J. Anderson, and whenever I'm not reading or writing, I enjoy listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast.